Hello, Professor Enloe. First of all, thank you for accepting our invitation. Actually, minutes are waiting for us. It is exciting for us to listen to you. We know that we have very little time, so I don't want to too far. I leave the word to for Florida, Liston, and Arman. Thank you for your kind support.
Okay, dear Cynthia, thank you so much for coming here today. It's a great pleasure to meet with you here today. First, as we talked with you before, could you please define what feminist international relations theory is? How can you define international feminist theory? Just in 1-2 minutes.
Sure. I know whole books are written about. But first of all, thanks to all of you for having me, and anybody who's listening. I wish I were there in Istanbul or Ankara or Izmir or Diyarbakir with you. But next to that, Zoom, at least we're kind of together. Yes, feminist international relations theory is like any theory. And that means that you, the listeners, you, the viewers here, you can judge it. A theory is a proposition to explain something. Theories are all about explaining, and every day, all of us explain things all the time. All of us are theorists. We just don't call what our explanations are, we don't call them theories, but we're always explaining. To be a feminist trying to explain things means that you always ask, how do ideas about and practices, that's like behavior, how do ideas about and practices of masculinities, that is, ideas about what it means to be manly, practices of what it means to be manly. Boys don't cry, classic, right? Well, of course, boys do cry. And combined with, now this is your understanding international relations by asking these questions. The second set of questions is, how do ideas about femininities, plural, just like masculinities are plural, which means there are big debates and there's varieties of them. How do ideas about what it means to be a proper woman, a respectable woman, a bad woman, a bad mother, how do those ideas work themselves into things like international trade? They do. Nuclear weapons policy? They do. Overseas military bases? They do. Migration? Absolutely. So to be engaged with, that is, join in the conversation about feminist theorizing, because it's an activity. It's not a marble block sitting out there in the middle of Taksim Square. It is an activity to engage in feminist theorizing, feminist explaining of how international politics in all its messiness works, is to be curious about the workings of and the contests about what it means to be manly and what it means to be a proper woman. Those debates, you have to be interested in that or you can't understand international relations.
Thank you, dear Cynthia. And our following question is about the movie Persepolis. Could you please explain how do you see Persepolis in a feminist way? How we can see the Persepolis using feminist lenses?
Oh, that's a great question, Elif. It's a great question because I was very, very lucky and I've met the author. The author is a Iranian graphic novelist and writer named Marjan Satrapi, and she smokes a lot. So when she gives talks, she gives smoke. She's tried to give it up. I think she's given it up now, but she's a wonderful person. She's a wonderful, generous person. She listens to questions. She answers very honestly. She's not a fancy person at all. And I have the books. She first of all wrote 2 books called Persepolis. That's the way I pronounce it, probably not correctly, not the way you would pronounce it in Farsi, probably. But Persepolis 1 and Persepolis 2. So those of you who are watching this and you want to see, well, what did she first write that was then turned into a movie? Go online, you can get it, a copy, and I bet you it's in Turkish as well as English. Persepolis 1 and Persepolis 2. So I'll give you so this is from my own copy. So this is my copy of Persepolis. And you'll notice that one of the things that's so wonderful about her movie is that, because she constructed the animation of the movie, is she kept her very dark black and white graphic style, which is just wonderful. And so that's her mother, that's her portrait of her mother. And so what she has done in this movie is give you a girl's eye view. Now already that's unusual to say, what does a revolution, in this case in Iran in the late 1970s, when she was 10 years old, I think. What does a revolution look like from the vantage point, from the perspective of a 10-year-old girl? Now, most people who talk about revolutions, and that's a big question, what causes them, who takes part in them, what are the consequences of them, you know, whether you're talking about the Mexican Revolution or the Russian Revolution or the French Revolution, we all, in international relations, we're all very interested in revolutions. What's unusual is that here she is saying, as a young girl, when I saw these debates on the street about whether women should wear veils or not, and then also whether my mother, this is her mother, whether my mother should have gone out in the streets and demonstrated for democracy against the new regime. And what happens when people started to try to threaten her because she had the nerve to go out and call for more democratic life during the revolution. So here is a young girl trying to make sense of her mother, her father, her uncle is very important in the whole story, and her own life as a schoolgirl. Well, that's really a different way to create feminist theory, and it's a different way to create explanations of what is a revolution? What is it? Who takes part in it? Who feels liberated by it? You have to now talk about a particular revolution. Who feels trapped by it? How do you explain your parents? Because in the next page, this in the movie would be, 10 seconds later. That's the great thing about a book. You can pause, you can look, you can think. That's why I love books. Movies are good, but I love books. Anyway, but here she is on the next page, taking part in her mother and her father debating over what she should say in school. Because she's quite a bright, energetic young schoolgirl. So she says things in class that her teacher doesn't really like. And then she has a debate with her mother and her father over should she say those things. Which also reminds us that in any revolution, in any international politics, schoolboys and schoolgirls are being taught certain things in school that may not be what their parents are teaching them. And therefore, any revolution, but any everyday politics, this is certainly true today in the United States and in Turkey and in other countries, everyday politics are worked out with young children and teachers in schools. Well, that really broadens our notion about what you should explain in order to explain a revolution. It says you should take girls seriously. Almost no other theorists about revolution take girls seriously to make sense of a revolution. But feminists do. Feminists don't just write off children as children. They say, what's happening to boys in a revolution? What's happening to girls in a revolution? And that's the way you're going to understand a revolution. Then they take mothers and fathers and they don't lump them together as parents. Feminists don't. Feminists never lump together anybody. And they say, do mothers and fathers have different opinions about what their daughters should do and what their sons should do to be revolutionary or to critique the revolution? What do mothers say? Why do they say it? What do fathers say? Why do they say it? And what happens then for the sons and the daughters in the family when mothers and fathers don't see it the same way? This is also true about war. This is also true about war. And what Persepolis in volume 2 turns out to be, this is Persepolis 1. Persepolis 2, which is also in the movie, is when you have the Iran-Iraq war. So the same thing is what feminists do to explain things. They say, what happens to girls in war? Which means you have to pay attention and take them seriously. What happens to boys in war? You have to take them seriously. What happens to fathers in war? What happens to mothers in war? What happens to diverse kinds of women in war? And her case is the Iran-Iraq war of the 1980s. So let me just introduce one other thing here, because I know our time is short, but I want all of you who are listening, I want you to be the theorist. Now, what I mean by that, I don't mean you all have to go for your PhDs, although it would be a good thing. It'd be a good thing for all of us if you did. But I just mean you yourselves who are watching this and thinking about it and making your own decisions, you are making up explanations all the time. If you use the word sexist to describe somebody or describe a professor or describe a book you're reading or describe a film that's become a big hit, if you say, oh, that's so sexist, you are theorizing, because you're theorizing about what makes a certain kind of unfair, discriminatory portrayal. So you're theorizing all the time. What is really important is that as a feminist, you ask yourself and you be reflective and you be critical of yourself of what questions do you not usually ask, but you should ask. Do all Turkish women today experience the war in the Southeast the same way? Do all Turkish women experience education the same way? So you don't ever lump together. You ask different questions. Now, here's the thing about movies. Here's the thing about movies. Sorry about that. It's life, right? Life. So here's the thing about movies. Movies are not just made by, in this case, the writer. There's Marjane Satrapi. Movies are made by, and I even wrote it out so that you think about it and write it down. Movies are made by an industry. Now, and that means that as a feminist, when you're trying to understand what kinds of movies get made, what kinds of movies don't get made, that's really important. It's a harder question to ask because it's always harder to ask about what doesn't appear in your streaming Netflix or whatever. That this is not just Marjane Satrapi, and it's not just you watching it on your computer or in a movie theater. I love blackboards, so since we don't have blackboards, I have my little drawings. It means that you as a feminist theorist, you have to ask about lots of different players behind every movie, behind the Wonder Woman series, behind Star Wars, behind any popular Turkish movie. Ask, who wrote the script? How different is it from the original writer? Who put up the money for it? That's called the producers. They have a lot of power, and you don't know any of their names. I don't mean they're secret. It's just that none of us know the names of producers, except the most famous producer in the world, who's now in jail, which is Harvey Weinstein, who was convicted for serial sexual harassment. That's probably the only producer's name most of us can name. Then there's the director. They're the marketing people. They're the casting people. They're the theater owners who decide to carry that film or not carry that film. That this is, and to make feminist sense of any movie or any television show, you could do this. Because none of this is secret. Find out what is the industry ideas about men and women that produced this film. Now I'm going to give you a source. This will be my last thing, because I want you all to be the researchers. Then I want you to all do a feminist investigation of a popular Turkish film or a popular Turkish television show. I want you to be the feminist theorist to explain why that show or why that film turned out the way it was and what they could have done, but they decided not to do. Here's a great source to give you a start. All right. USC is the University of Southern California. That's separate than the other universities in California. University of Southern California, sometimes just referred to as USC. Has a lot of big sports teams. But it has the best research project on sexism and racism in American movie making. And that project is Annenberg, who in fact was a millionaire in the media industry, but he gave his money to the university to do research. A good millionaire as versus other kinds of millionaires. And so it's called the USC, University of Southern California, Annenberg Inclusion Initiative. And inclusion here means anti-racist, anti-sexist. And they have two studies, both of which have come out in 2020 and 2021. One is on film and television shows, and the other is on the music, American music industry. You look at those, and then you'll be led to other studies. There are other studies, but these are the biggest, and they're every year. And you find out, so who did the person who put up all the money say, I don't want any black actors because you lose money if you put a black actor in? Did the producer or did the director, did the director say, I don't want that woman looking so powerful. That's not a proper woman. We've got to make her look a little more frilly, a little weaker. And how did they get along? And the industry produces what you and me, what we finally see. So do your own studies. And the movie industry, of course, is a global industry. That's why you study it in IR. The television industry is a global industry. That's why you study it. Marjane Satrapi's Persepolis, both her books and her film, they are international relations. So find out. Make up your, not make up, but discover through your own serious, careful findings, find out how the popular entertainment that is shown to so many Turkish viewers, find out how it's made and how you think ideas about femininity and ideas about masculinity shaped the programs and the movies that you see. Be critical. Ask what could have been and wonder why it isn't. Who resists? Who has a different idea of profit? Who imagines that you won't watch a powerful woman? That's feminist theorizing. Thanks, everybody.